Let's bring in Jason Onruhe, who's a political analyst and commentator, who joins us from Ontario to tell us more about this. Well, it didn't take too long, did it? The U.S. has not only asked for an increase in its budget for manufacturing missiles, also it is asking now to deploy missiles in Asia. Uh, the focus before was in Europe. What is your reading into this quick action after the U.S. withdrawal from the INF and now its interest in these placement of missiles?
Well, I think that this is obviously no coincidence. They were planning this for some time now. The excuse that Russia allegedly violated the agreement was just the pretext for doing so. We can see this the same with the JCPOA. The claim that Iran had violated it and then presenting no evidence was just the pretext for having left it. I think that this is largely a power play by the United States. Now, if they say that they're going to put missiles in Asia, I can think of no more likely target than the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. I think very likely these missiles are going to be placed in South Korea and aimed at the North. I think given the way that the two countries have gotten along recently, that there's almost zero chance that these missiles are going to be aimed anywhere else. So theoretically, they could also be aimed at China. But I think given the current state of affairs, this is more likely to be aimed at the DPRK. I mean, China's a much larger target, one that is much more difficult to hit with intermediate range missiles, given the vast size of China. Something intercontinental would probably be better militarily to use against China. So I think that given the much smaller size of the DPRK, roughly about the size of the U.S. state of Pennsylvania, that I think that these are going to be placed in the south and aimed at the north. As we just recently saw, there were several missile tests carried out by the DPRK in this last week after essentially Donald Trump had once again failed to live up to his word regarding his last conversation, or at least the last diplomatic efforts with the country. And then in retaliation, the DPRK tested several missiles, and I think that perhaps this is why they're going to be placed inside of Asia. All this talk about perhaps coming to some kind of agreement with the North was just a stalling tactic in order to get things together, in order to be able to put a better missile system inside the South to aim at the North. The U.S. has not been one to come to the negotiating table on any honest grounds whatsoever in basically the history of the country. So I don't really see that as being different this time. There were many peaceful overtures, many friendly photo ops and actions, but nothing of substance came out of the United States. Nothing that has been promised has been delivered. No sanctions have been removed. And as a result, we saw the actions of the DPRK in order to counter that. So I think that this is going to be part of a larger pressure effort against the DPRK. So again, in summation, I think that likely these missiles are going to be placed in the south and aimed at the north.
Okay, so that's very interesting. You're saying, if I'm correct, to conclude from what you said, Jason Onruhe, that the U.S. was playing a delaying tactic with North Korea in order to conclude its withdrawal from the INF after it announced that it was going to give Russia an interim period of, I think it was about 6 months or 9 months perhaps, to have Russia comply with the INF, which, according to the U.S., it hasn't. And then the U.S. now, after its withdrawal, is placing the missiles perhaps in South Korea. And this was with the aim by delaying the talks for it to reach any type of fruition. Is that correct?
That's essentially what I'm saying. Yes, I think that it was very much set up this way. I mean, they told Russia to comply with certain conditions that were already agreed to. Like it's like asking someone to prove a negative. You can't do something it is that you've already done. So they can just turn around and say that this was non-cooperation. But that's my reading of the situation.
We're still waiting to get a reaction from China. I would assume that China is going to have a reaction to this, obviously. But as to what type of action it's going to take, keeping in mind that there's so many crisis points that you find the common denominator here being the U.S. Provoking China in many different ways, from Taiwan to Hong Kong to the South China Sea. What can we expect from China?
Well, obviously, China is going to react very negatively towards this and is going to come out with a very China-esque statement saying they regret this kind of provocation. They would like the United States to stop doing this, perhaps come to some kind of a discussion table, etc. But in the end, the United States will simply blow these off the same way they have many of the negotiations for trade. No doubt this will also be used in relation to China and the ongoing difficulties that they've had over reaching a new trade agreement. I'm sure this will probably be used in some kind of bargaining chip or some way to try to antagonize the Chinese. But I really do feel like this is probably going to be aimed more at the DPRK than it is China, although these missiles can certainly have a dual effect in this way.
Thank you, Jason Unruh. Many thanks. Political commentator and analyst there.